He lost everything, but not in the way most people imagine. Some losses are loud, public, humiliating. Others cut so deeply into the soul that a man is never the same again. Tonight, you'll meet someone who once had it all. Success, wealth, influence, a name respected in every room he walked into, until the day life stripped him of every illusion and left him with nothing but silence, regret, and a heart too tired to believe in second chances. But here's the part no one tells you. Sometimes God rebuilds a person in the most unexpected places, through the most unexpected people, and in the quiet moments when no one is watching. Tonight you will see what happens when a man who has fallen from the top crosses paths with a woman who has never had much yet carries everything he's been missing: humility, kindness, and a faith that does not break even in the hardest seasons. A woman who doesn't care about titles or money, only about truth. A woman God uses in ways she herself cannot understand. This is not just a story about romance. It is about the kind of rebuilding only heaven can orchestrate. About the moments that look insignificant but end up changing everything. About the grace that enters a life quietly, sits at a wounded table and says, "Get up. Your story isn't over." As you watch, you will feel the sting of his failures, the warmth of her presence, and the soft, unmistakable way God breathes life into places that once felt dead. And if you've ever felt broken, forgotten, or unsure of where your life is heading, stay, because this story holds pieces of healing for you too. Before we begin, take 1 second and subscribe. Stories like this one, stories of redemption, second chances, and love that transforms, are what we share here every week. Don't miss what God wants to whisper to your heart today. Stay until the end. This is one of those stories you'll carry with you long after it ends. The bus hissed as it stopped on the edge of Briar Creek, the kind of small southern town where time seemed softer and people still waved at strangers. Elias stepped down with a single duffel bag and eyes that looked older than his age. His once tailored suits were replaced with worn jeans, a faded gray jacket, and boots scraped by miles he never meant to walk. He scanned the quiet street, unsure why he came here, only that he needed somewhere no one knew his name. He inhaled deeply, as if trying to steady the storm still spinning inside him. The betrayal, the headlines, the humiliation, everything clung to him like invisible ash. Briar Creek didn't know who he was, and for the first time, anonymity felt like mercy. A soft wind brushed through the trees lining the road, almost as if welcoming him. He didn't believe in signs anymore, but he wished he could. He wished God hadn't gone silent. The smell of fresh bread drifted from the corner bakery, warm and inviting. His stomach growled. He hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon. Pride whispered that he should keep walking, keep his distance, avoid places where people could look at him too closely. But hunger won. He pushed open the door, and a small bell above it chimed, announcing his arrival. The sound felt too gentle for someone who had crashed so hard. Inside, the bakery was simple but beautiful, with wooden shelves, hand-painted mugs, and little vases of wildflowers on every table. The air felt warm, like home, even for someone who no longer knew what home was. Behind the counter stood a young woman wiping flour from her apron. She looked up, startled for half a heartbeat, then smiled softly. Not a polite smile, not a forced one, a real smile. "Good morning," she said, her voice warm like cinnamon. "Feel free to sit anywhere. I'll be with you in just a second." Elias nodded stiffly, unused to kindness without hidden agendas. He slid into a corner booth, keeping his back to the wall, a leftover instinct from boardroom battles and betrayal. He tried to make himself small, unnoticed. But she noticed anyway. She approached with quiet steps, as if she sensed he needed gentleness. "What can I get for you?" she asked. He opened the menu, saw the prices, and felt his chest tighten. He had enough for a simple breakfast, nothing more. "Just coffee," he murmured. The words felt like surrender. She didn't push. She only nodded and walked away, her red hair swaying lightly behind her. Something about her presence soothed him, unexpected, unwelcome, yet strangely comforting. Mara Collins. He didn't know her name yet, but he felt the warmth she carried. She prepared his coffee slowly, thoughtfully, as if even the smallest task deserved care. He watched without meaning to. She noticed, offered another small smile, then brought the steaming mug to his table. "Made it fresh," she said. "It's a cold morning. You look like you could use something warm." He wrapped his hands around the cup, letting the heat seep into his fingers. "Thank you," he whispered. 2 words he hadn't spoken sincerely in a long time. Mara didn't pry. She simply set down a small plate with a complimentary butter roll. "On the house. We always give one to first-time customers." It was a lie, he could tell, but a gentle one. A gift disguised as tradition. Elias stared at the roll, his pride wrestling with his hunger. Accepting help felt dangerous, like a reminder of how far he'd fallen. Yet something in her eyes, steady, kind, undeniably sincere, made it impossible to refuse. "I appreciate it," he finally said. She nodded and walked back to the counter, giving him space without leaving him alone. She had a rare talent for that balance. As he ate slowly, savoring each bite, the bakery began to fill with the soft hum of morning life. Elderly couples shared memories. A mechanic ordered his usual. A mother soothed her toddler. The world here felt untouched by the noise and cruelty he'd known. For a moment, he closed his eyes and imagined what it would feel like to start over, to be someone else, someone better. Across the room, Mara glanced his way again, not with curiosity, no, with concern. She noticed the exhaustion in his posture, the loneliness pressed into his shoulders. She didn't know his story, but she recognized hurt when she saw it. She had grown up watching her grandmother care for the broken. Sometimes people didn't need answers. They needed presence. Elias finished his coffee and stood, unsure whether to stay or disappear back into the cold. Mara approached quietly. "If you need somewhere warm for a bit, you can stay," she said gently. "We don't rush people here." Her words caught him off guard. No one had offered him space. Only demands, expectations, judgments. "Thank you," he said again, softer this time. He pulled out a few crumpled bills, but Mara shook her head. "Coffee's on the house today. First one is free." Another lie. Another gift. Elias blinked, speechless. Generosity without reason felt foreign, dangerous. He wasn't sure he deserved it. But she didn't flinch or second guess. She simply gave. Before he could respond, the door opened and 2 customers entered. Mara excused herself with a gentle smile, leaving him alone with thoughts he didn't trust. He looked at his reflection in the bakery window. Unshaven, tired, a man who once commanded rooms now struggling to command his own hope. For the first time in months, something inside him stirred. Something like possibility. He stepped outside, the wind cooler now, carrying the scent of rain. Briar Creek had a way of slowing everything down, forcing people to face themselves. Elias wasn't ready, but life no longer cared about his readiness. Sometimes God uses a quiet town to heal a loud heart. He walked down the sidewalk with no destination, his footsteps heavy yet strangely lighter than before. He didn't know why Mara's kindness affected him so deeply. Maybe because it was real. Maybe because it had been a long time since anyone saw him without wanting something in return. Or maybe because rebuilding always starts with something small. At the corner of the street, he paused. He didn't know what he was doing next. But he knew one thing. The world he once belonged to no longer existed. And the world he had stepped into, this small town simplicity, might hold the very redemption he never believed he'd receive. He inhaled, exhaled, and let himself take one more step forward. Behind him, Mara watched from the bakery window, her hands still dusted with flour. She didn't know why that stranger pulled at her heart. But she felt it, God whispering something she couldn't yet understand. And just like that, their stories began to intertwine. Quietly, gently, exactly where heaven intended. Elias woke before sunrise the next morning, unable to sleep in the tiny room he had rented above an old hardware store. The bed was creaky, the heater made odd clicking sounds, and the walls were thin enough to hear the neighbor's television. But the real reason he couldn't rest was simpler. His mind refused to quiet. Failure echoed in every corner of that room. He stared at the cracked ceiling and exhaled. At some point in his life, he had believed he was untouchable. Now he felt like he could break from a single wrong breath. He needed work. Any work. Something to keep him grounded. Something that proved he wasn't helpless. Pride protested sharply, but pride had already cost him too much. At the community center, a handwritten sign was taped to the door. Help needed. Maintenance and cleaning. Elias hesitated, his hand hovering above the doorknob. CEO to janitor. The fall stung like salt in an open wound, but he turned the knob anyway. Sometimes survival required choices that felt like humiliation. Inside, he met Mrs. Alder, the center's director, an older woman with silver hair, denim overalls, and eyes that seemed to read souls. "You look like a man who knows how to work," she said before he even introduced himself. Elias swallowed hard. "I can do whatever needs to be done." He didn't know if it was true, but the alternative was worse. She handed him a mop, a checklist, and a worn-out set of keys. "This place runs on heart, not perfection," she said. "Do your best, and don't disappear like the last guy." Elias nodded. The mop felt heavier than it should. Not physically, emotionally, as if it represented everything he'd tried so hard to avoid becoming. His first task was the gym floor. The smell of old wood varnish and childhood memories filled the space. He dragged the mop across the surface, feeling the sting of humiliation with every movement. He had once made decisions that affected hundreds of employees. Now he was scrubbing spilled juice off a court no one played on anymore. But something unexpected happened. The rhythm of the work quieted the noise inside him. The simplicity of it, the clarity of doing one thing at a time, felt strangely grounding. There was no chaos, no betrayal, no boardroom lies. Only floors, walls, windows, and the steady breath of someone trying to start over. At lunchtime, he stepped into the center's small kitchen to drink water. Through the window, he saw the bakery across the street, saw Mara laughing with an elderly customer as she handed him a bag of warm pastries. Her laughter carried even through the glass. It made something in his chest tighten, in a way that wasn't painful. He looked away quickly, feeling foolish. She was just a kind stranger, someone who extended a hand without knowing who he was. Someone he didn't want to disappoint. He finished his water and returned to work, wishing he didn't care so much about how she might see him. Mrs. Alder found him later sweeping the hallway. "You work quiet," she said. Quiet men usually carry loud stories. Elias froze for a second. "I just need the job." She nodded as if she understood more than he said. Everyone here needs something. Sometimes what they need finds them before they know they're looking. By late afternoon, the ache in his back reminded him he was no longer the man who spent days behind sleek office desks. Physical labor humbled him, exhausted him, but in a strange, fragile way, it steadied him too. He finished mopping the final hallway and leaned against the wall to catch his breath. As he stepped outside, the sun was lowering behind the hills, painting the town in soft gold. He hadn't noticed beauty like that in years, too busy chasing numbers and power. Here, everything slowed. Here, the world breathed differently. Maybe he could learn to breathe again, too. He crossed the street without meaning to, drawn toward the aroma of warm bread. Mara was sweeping the bakery's entrance, locking up for the evening. When she looked up and saw him, her smile lit gently, like she had expected him. "Long day?" she asked. "You could say that," he replied, rubbing his shoulder. She leaned on the broom with easy grace. Sometimes the hardest days are the ones that matter most. He didn't know how she did that. Speak simple sentences that hit deeper than speeches he'd heard from world-class leaders. "I'm working at the community center," he said quietly. "Maintenance." Mara nodded, completely unfazed. "Good place. Honest work." The way she said it, with respect, not pity, caught him by surprise. He expected judgment, a flicker of superiority. But she looked at him like he was just a man doing what needed to be done. Nothing more, nothing less. And maybe that was what mercy sounded like. "I'll see you around," Elias said, unsure why he suddenly felt shy. Mara held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary. "You will," she said softly, as though it were more of a promise than a possibility. Something warm fluttered in his chest. Dangerous? unfamiliar, but welcome. He walked back to his small rented room under a sky slowly filling with stars. For the first time in months, he didn't feel entirely alone. Something was shifting, not dramatically, but subtly, like the first breeze before a storm of healing. And he wasn't sure what scared him more, staying broken or letting someone help rebuild him. As he unlocked his door, he paused and looked back toward the bakery's glowing windows. Mara was inside, wiping down tables with unhurried care. Elias exhaled softly. Maybe the world hadn't ended for him. Maybe it had simply begun again, in the quietest place he least expected. The next morning arrived slower than usual, wrapped in the pale blue quiet of Briar Creek's early hours. Mara was already setting trays of fresh pastries behind the glass display when she noticed Elias passing by the bakery window. He walked with a tired but determined stride, the kind that belonged to someone trying to outrun yesterday. She felt a tug at her heart before she even realized she was watching him. She didn't know why he sparked that instinct in her. Maybe it was the heaviness in his eyes, or the way he carried himself like a man haunted by something he couldn't name. There was a humility in him that didn't match his posture. Something about him whispered of a past that didn't fit the clothes he wore now. Around noon, the bakery grew busy, and Mara barely had time to breathe. But as she wiped down the counter during a lull, a voice behind her said softly, "Hi, is the offer still good? The warm place?" She turned. Elias stood in the doorway again, hesitant, almost embarrassed to be there. His presence shifted something inside the small room, like an unexpected breeze. "Always," she replied gently. "Sit wherever you like." He nodded and chose the same corner table as before. There was a comfort in that, as if he wanted to recreate the only moment of peace he'd found in months. Mara brought him coffee and a roll, again on the house, and he looked at her as if trying to understand her generosity. "You don't have to do this," he murmured. "I know," she answered. "I want to." The words were simple, honest, and they landed deeper than she realized. Elias lowered his gaze to the table, his throat tightening with something he didn't permit himself to name. When she stepped away to serve another customer, the bell on the door rang, and a man in a sharp suit stepped inside. Out of place in a town like Briar Creek, he scanned the bakery with the arrogance of someone accustomed to being listened to. His gaze landed on Elias and his lips curled. Well, if it isn't the fallen king." Mara froze. Elias stiffened, his shoulders tensing as if bracing for impact. The man sauntered toward him with the confidence of someone who enjoyed causing discomfort. "Didn't expect to see you hiding in a place like this," he said, loud enough for others to hear. "How's the Empire?" "Oh, right. Gone." Elias's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Silence was his only shield now. Mara felt her pulse quicken as she watched the scene unfold. The suit man scoffed. "You really traded boardrooms for broom closets, huh? Never thought I'd see the day." Elias swallowed hard, the humiliation burning through him. Before she could stop herself, Mara stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said firmly. "If you're not here to order, I'll kindly ask you to leave." The man turned toward her, annoyed. "Do you know who he is?" Mara met his stare without flinching. "Do you know who he is now?" The man blinked. She didn't raise her voice, but her words cut like truth should. The suited man huffed and muttered something under his breath before walking out. Elias exhaled shakily, as if his lungs had forgotten how to function. The bakery returned to silence except for the quiet hum of the fridge. Mara approached his table slowly, unsure if she had crossed a line. "I'm sorry," she said gently, but Elias shook his head. "No, thank you." He rubbed his forehead with trembling fingers. You didn't have to defend me like that." Mara shrugged lightly. "Sometimes people forget how to treat other human beings. I'm not a fan of that kind of forgetting." He hesitated, then whispered, "He's right. About who I was." Mara stayed quiet, giving him space. He continued, voice low, almost fragile. "I used to run a tech company, Hale International. Maybe you've heard of it." She hadn't, and something about that made him breathe a little easier. "I wasn't a good man," he said, staring into his coffee. "Money, pride, everything got big inside me, bigger than it should have. And then Everything crashed. Mara listened carefully, not judging, not pitying, just present, the way people rarely were. Sometimes God lets things fall so we can see what actually holds. He looked up at her, startled by the clarity in her words. "You talk like someone who's been through something." Mara smiled faintly. "Everyone has. But my grandmother always said that broken pieces in the right hands can become something beautiful again." Elias felt something shift in the room. Something delicate. Something hopeful. He didn't understand why he trusted her. Why her presence felt like a safe place his soul hadn't known in years. Maybe because she saw him without his past. Maybe because she didn't flinch at his ruins. Or maybe because God places certain people exactly where we need them, even when we don't believe we deserve it. Mara took a step back, letting him breathe. "You can stay as long as you want. The bakery closes at 5, she said softly. Elias nodded. "Thank you. Really." But as she turned away, he felt the weight of her kindness settle deeper. It was unfamiliar, and terrifying, and strangely healing. When he finally stood to leave, he hesitated at the door. He glanced back at Mara, wiping flour from her hands, humming quietly to herself. Something about her calmness made the chaos in him less violent. He didn't know what this connection meant yet, but he knew it wasn't accidental. Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of rain again. Elias looked up at the gray skies and exhaled, a quiet prayer he didn't realize he had whispered slipping from his lips. "God, if you're still here, don't let me waste this." And somewhere inside the bakery, Mara felt a pull in her spirit, like God whispering, "Pay attention. This story is just beginning." That night, Elias barely slept. The stranger's mocking voice echoed through his mind, reopening wounds he thought time had numbed. Success had made him feared, admired, respected. Losing everything made him exposed, small, breakable. And yet, Mara's calm defense replayed in his memory too, soft, firm, and strangely powerful. He turned on the single lamp in his small room, its dim glow revealing shadows that clung to the walls like old regrets. He rubbed his temples, wishing he could silence the past. But memories have sharp edges, and his cut deep. Even when he closed his eyes, the shame followed him, relentless and familiar. By morning, his exhaustion was visible in the slump of his shoulders. As he stepped back into the community center, Mrs. Alder took one look at him and raised an eyebrow. "Rough night?" she asked. "You could say that," he muttered. "Mm-hmm," she replied knowingly. Men who don't deal with their pain always look like that. Her bluntness startled him. "I'm dealing with it," he insisted. "No, you're surviving it," she said, tapping a stack of donation boxes. "Big difference." Elias sighed and began to lift the boxes, each one heavier than the last. His body strained, but the physical pain distracted him from the emotional one. Sometimes hurt was easier to handle when it came from sore muscles. As he worked, flashes of his past life flickered through his mind. Glossy meetings, fake friendships, betrayals dressed in expensive suits. People who shook his hand with one intention and stabbed his back with another. He remembered the day the scandal broke, how his phone lit up with notifications of people abandoning him. He bit the inside of his cheek, grounding himself in the present. The dusty smell of the storage room, the rattle of old metal shelves, the faint hum of fluorescent lights. Mundane things, but real. Honest. This place didn't ask anything from him. It didn't lie. It didn't pretend. Around lunchtime, he stepped outside for air. His steps carried him, without permission, toward the bakery. But today Mara wasn't at the counter. A younger teen girl was there instead. "She's out back," the girl said, checking the garden boxes. "You can go if you want." He hesitated, then walked around the side of the building. There, kneeling beside a set of wooden planters, was Mara, sleeves rolled up, hands covered in soil. The sight struck him, simple, gentle, full of life. She looked up, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Oh, hey," she said with a soft smile. "Didn't think I'd see you today." I just needed air," Elias replied. It wasn't the truth, but it wasn't a lie either. Mara patted the soil gently. Plants are easier than people, she said. They don't hide their wounds. They show you exactly where it hurts. The metaphor hit him like a quiet revelation. He crouched beside her, careful not to touch the freshly watered dirt. You meant what you said yesterday, didn't you? About things needing to fall so we can see what holds. Mara nodded slowly. My family lost everything once. Not money, our peace. My dad walked out when I was 12. It broke my mom. Broke me too, for a long time. Elias swallowed, surprised by her honesty. You seem put together. She laughed softly. Healing doesn't erase the past. It just teaches you how to live without letting it lead. He stared at the soil, feeling something inside him tremble. Like a wound recognizing another wound. Mara brushed dirt off her hands and looked at him gently. You don't have to tell me your story. Not if it hurts too much, but I want you to know. You don't scare me. Whatever happened, whatever you lost, I don't see you through that lens. His throat tightened. People always saw him through what he owned, what he built, what he achieved. No one, not even he himself, knew who he was without those things. But Mara, she saw the man, not the ruins. He sat back on the pavement, elbows on his knees. I trusted the wrong people, he whispered. They cost me everything, my company, my reputation, my name. Mara's voice softened. Then maybe God is giving you a new one. He looked at her, startled again by how plainly she spoke truth. I don't know if I deserve that, he admitted. None of us deserve grace, she said. That's why it's grace. Her eyes glimmered with sincerity, not pity. She never pitied him. She simply understood. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of warm bread from the kitchen. Somewhere nearby, a church bell chimed the hour. Elias felt the world slow around them, as if time had carved out a small pocket of peace just for this moment. For the first time in months, Elias didn't feel like a failure sitting beside her. He felt human, seen, not redeemed yet, but not condemned either. Mara stood and brushed off her apron. Come by later, she said softly. I'll save you a slice of blueberry pie. You look like someone who could use something sweet. As she walked back inside, Elias watched her with a heart caught between gratitude and fear. She was becoming a place of comfort, a lighthouse in his storm. And the closer he felt drawn to her, the more terrified he became of losing the one thing helping him breathe again. He didn't know it yet, but the next storm was approaching, and it would test everything. The next morning, Elias arrived at the community center with a strange lightness in his chest. Mara's quiet strength lingered in his thoughts, weaving softness into the hard places of his memory. But as he pushed open the door, that lightness vanished. 3 men in expensive coats stood in the lobby, faces he once trusted. They turned at the same time, recognition sparking like venom. There he is, one of them said. His name was Trent Alder, former board member and the same man who had voted to remove Elias when the scandal erupted. Didn't expect to find you sweeping floors in a ghost town community center. Elias froze. His mouth went dry. Trent walked closer, hands in his pockets, voice dripping with superiority. We're here for a charity event. Mrs. Alder invited us. Imagine our surprise seeing you in this. He gestured around the hallway with mocking disbelief. Elias's jaw tensed. I work here now. Trent chuckled. Work? You? Come on, Elias. Everyone knows you're not built for humility. The words sliced deeper than intended because part of Elias feared they were true. He had built a life on ego, on conquering, not serving. Another board member stepped forward. We're reopening the case, he said coldly. There were emails traced back to your account, incriminating ones. Elias felt his stomach drop. You know I didn't send those. Maybe. Maybe not. Trent smirked. Either way, your name stays buried where it belongs. Elias felt something tighten in his chest, fear mixed with anger, shame, and exhaustion. Why are you really here? He asked. Trent shrugged. Checking loose ends, making sure you stay in the shadows. Some of us still have careers to protect. Mrs. Alder entered then, her eyes narrowing as she sensed the tension. Is there a problem? Trent smiled politely. Not at all. Just greeting an old friend. Elias looked away, unable to stand the hypocrisy. Mrs. Alder's gaze lingered on him after they left. Sharp, observant, almost maternal. You gonna tell me what that was about? She asked. Elias sighed. Old life. Looks like it still has its claws in you. He nodded softly. It does. Mrs. Alder crossed her arms. Then cut them off. Plain and simple. He spent the afternoon scrubbing paint off the hallway walls, but his mind kept replaying the confrontation, every insult, every accusation, every lie they had built to protect themselves. His hand shook more than once, and he had to stop, breathe, remind himself he wasn't that man anymore. When he stepped outside for air, he found Mara leaning against the bakery's back door, sipping lemonade from a mason jar. Her expression softened the moment she saw him. You look like you ran through a storm, she said gently. Elias exhaled shakily. The past, it caught up with me today. She set her jar down. Do you want to talk about it? He hesitated, torn between pride and pain. They're reopening my case, trying to bury me again. Mara folded her arms, listening with the kind of attention that made a man unravel. They framed me, he whispered. Emails, documents, all falsified. They twisted everything so they could take the company. Mara's brows pinched with concern. Elias, that's evil. That's not business, that's cruelty. Her words lifted something heavy off his chest. He looked at her, searching for judgment. There was none. They think I'm weak now, he said. Maybe you are, she answered softly. But weakness isn't failure. Sometimes it's the beginning of rebuilding. Elias swallowed, emotion tightening his throat. Mara stepped closer, her voice a quiet anchor. You're not alone anymore. You don't have to fight this in the dark. Her nearness steadied him more than she knew. Why do you care? He whispered. She hesitated, then spoke truthfully. Because God doesn't put people in our path by accident. Before either of them could say more, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. Trent stepped out again, this time holding a folder. Forgot to give you this, he called mockingly. You'll want to read it. Elias didn't move. Mara did. She walked forward, took the folder from Trent's hand, and said calmly, He doesn't need your poison. Trent scoffed. Oh, he absolutely does. It contains everything they're accusing him of. Mara held the folder tighter. Then he'll face it. Without you. Trent looked at her more closely, as if realizing she wasn't as meek as she seemed. Careful, sweetheart. You don't know what he's done. I know enough, she replied. When Trent drove away, Elias felt the weight of the folder in Mara's hands, a weight he feared would crush him. Mara approached him slowly, her eyes soft. You don't have to read it alone, she said. Elias took a shaky breath, heart pounding. I don't know if I can handle it. Mara nodded. Then we'll face it one page at a time. As they walked back toward the bakery, the sky shifted, darkening, warning, preparing. Something in Elias understood that this moment would define everything that came next. The past wasn't finished with him, but neither was God. And Mara's presence felt like the beginning of a battle he might finally be strong enough to fight. The bakery felt colder that evening, despite the ovens warming the entire room. Elias sat at the corner table, the unopened folder in front of him, its edges worn from his trembling fingers. Mara stood across from him, her presence steady, her expression soft but serious. Whenever you're ready, she said. But readiness wasn't the problem. Courage was. He opened the folder slowly, each page a punch to the chest. Fake emails, manipulated financial reports, contracts he had never signed. Every lie crafted to make him look guilty, greedy, corrupt, reckless. His breath grew shallow, his pulse uneven. They made me into a monster, he whispered, voice cracking, and people believed them. Mara's eyes softened with sorrow. People believe what's convenient, not what's true. Elias swallowed hard. This could ruin me again. Even now, even here. Mara closed her hand gently over his. Then we don't let it. Her touch steadied him. Barely, but enough. But outside the bakery, whispers had already begun. Someone had recognized Trent during his visit. Someone else had seen Elias with the folder. And small towns, despite their warmth, carry news faster than the wind. By morning, rumors swirled through Briar Creek like dust in a storm. The words stung. Criminal, fraud, dangerous, liar. Elias heard them as he walked to the community center. Twice people crossed the street to avoid him. A mother pulled her child closer. His stomach twisted. He had lived through public destruction once. Living through it again felt unbearable. When he reached the center, Mrs. Alder intercepted him with crossed arms and an unblinking stare. "I've heard things," she said bluntly. "So have I," he murmured. "Are they true?" Elias hesitated, eyes burning. "No, but that doesn't matter, does it?" Mrs. Alder leaned in. "Truth matters to me. So does character. And I've seen both in you." Her words should have comforted him, but fear had already dug its claws into his chest. "Mrs. Alder, if the board moves forward and if this gets serious," she raised a hand, "then you'll face it, with your head up, like a man rebuilding, not running." He nodded, but doubt still gnawed at him. By midday, the bakery grew strangely quiet. People came in, but their glances toward Mara were cautious, curious, concerned. Two women whispered near the door, eyes shifting between her and Elias. Mara ignored them, but Elias didn't miss the hurt flickering across her face. Finally, one customer spoke up, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Be careful around him, Mara. You don't know who he really is." Elias stiffened, shame prickling his skin. Mara straightened her shoulders, wiped her hands, and walked toward the woman. "I know exactly who he is," she said firmly, "and he's not who you think." But the woman only shrugged. "Suit yourself. Just don't come crying when it blows up in your face." Mara's jaw tightened. Elias wanted to defend her, to say something, anything, but the words stuck like thorns in his throat. He felt responsible for her discomfort, for everything. When the bakery emptied out, Mara leaned against the counter, breathing hard. "I'm sorry," Elias whispered. "For what?" she asked. "For dragging you into my mess." Mara shook her head. "You didn't drag me. I chose to stand by you." Her voice held conviction, but her eyes held exhaustion. Elias stepped closer, guilt weighing heavy on every breath. "Mara, if staying near me hurts you, maybe I should leave." Her eyes snapped up, sharp with pain. "Is that what you do? Leave?" The question hit him like a slap. I don't want to be the reason your life gets harder." "You're not," she said softly. "Fear is." He looked away, the truth burning through him. She was right. Fear was the thing pulling him apart. Fear of being seen, fear of being judged, fear of being loved. Mara touched his arm gently. "Elias, healing doesn't happen in hiding." He closed his eyes. Her words steadied him more than she knew. But then the bakery door opened, hard, sharp, loud. A man stormed inside, anger etched into every line of his face. "Is it true?" he demanded. "Is that man really working at the community center?" Elias stiffened. Mara stepped forward. "What's going on?" "My daughter goes there," the man said, voice shaking. "And I won't let a criminal be near her." Mara held up her hand. "Elias isn't—" But the man cut her off. "I don't care what you think you know. People like him don't change. They destroy everything they touch." Elias's throat tightened. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to flee before he hurt this town, before he hurt Mara. He stepped forward, voice quiet but firm. "If my presence makes you uncomfortable, I'll leave the center." Mara turned to him in disbelief. "Elias, no," but he kept going. "Your daughter's safety is more important than my pride." It wasn't surrender. It was protection. But to Mara, it felt like a man drowning while pushing away the only lifeline offered. The angry man grunted and left, slamming the door behind him. Silence collapsed over the room. Mara looked at Elias, hurt radiating from her eyes. "Why did you do that?" "Because I won't let innocent people pay for my past," he said. "You're not guilty," she countered. "Doesn't matter," he whispered. "People believe what they want." Mara stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Elias, don't run. Don't disappear. Not now." But the storm in his chest was louder than her plea. He grabbed his coat, unable to meet her gaze. "I just need space," he said. And as he walked out into the cold dusk, Mara felt something inside her crack. Not because he left, but because she feared the storm would carry him too far to find his way back. Elias walked alone through Briar Creek as dusk settled into a blue-gray hush, the wind colder than usual. His breath fogged in the air, matching the heaviness clouding his chest. Every step echoed the same thought: "You don't belong here." Shame had a way of twisting truth into chains, and tonight those chains wrapped tightly around his ribs. He reached the little bridge behind the community center and leaned on the railing, staring at the slow-moving creek below. The water reflected his fractured state, shaken, muddied, but somehow still moving. His whole life he'd been taught to fight, to win, to dominate. But now, every win felt like a lie. Every loss felt deserved. Yet beneath the noise of his self-blame, Mara's voice kept returning. Healing doesn't happen in hiding. He closed his eyes and exhaled shakily. Maybe that was why everything hurt so much. Because for the first time, someone had seen him and stayed. And he was terrified of disappointing her. Suddenly, footsteps approached. Elias turned to see Mrs. Alder standing there with her hands in her coat pockets, expression stern but gentle. "Figured I'd find you brooding somewhere quiet," she said. Elias huffed a tired breath. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore." "You're doing what every broken man does," she said. "You're deciding who you want to be next." She moved beside him, leaning on the railing. "Listen, son. People can say whatever they want, but truth doesn't vanish just because someone throws mud on it." Elias swallowed hard. "Doesn't matter when everyone believes the mud." Mrs. Alder shook her head. "It matters to you. It matters to the people God placed in your life." Her words pushed something loose inside him. "I left the center today," Elias admitted. "I know," she replied calmly. "And it was the coward's choice." Elias flinched. The honesty hit him like cold water. "Running never saved anyone," she added. "But staying saves souls, including your own." He stared at the creek, throat tight. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." "Strength doesn't come first," she said. "Choice does." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You want your life back? Your dignity? Then you fight the darkness that stole it from you. And you let people stand with you." Her meaning was clear. Mara. The thought of her name alone made his chest ache with longing and fear. "I hurt her today," Elias whispered. "Then unhurt her," Mrs. Alder said simply. He blinked. "It's not that easy. Son, everything worth doing in this life is not easy. That's why so few people do it." A long silence settled between them. Finally, Mrs. Alder sighed. "Your case, those lies, they're afraid of you. That's why they keep resurfacing. Evil doesn't chase the weak, it chases the ones who threaten its power." Her words struck his core. "You are not powerless, Elias. You're just untrained in humility. But you're learning. And that means you're dangerous to the darkness." When she left, Elias stayed on the bridge, her words echoing like distant thunder. Choice before strength. Maybe that was the key. Maybe God didn't want him perfect, just willing. The wind brushed against him, almost like a push, a nudge to move, to act, to return. He walked back toward town with determined steps, not fast, not confident, but deliberate. When he reached the bakery, the lights inside were low, the closed sign already flipped. But through the window, he saw Mara, wiping hopelessly at her eyes, trying to hide her tears, even though no one was watching. Elias felt his breath catch. He hadn't just disappointed her. He had wounded someone who fought for him when no one else did. With a shaky hand, he knocked on the door. Mara startled, then hesitated before unlocking it. She opened the door only part way. Her eyes were red, her voice tired. "Elias, what are you doing here?" "I came to say I'm sorry," he said immediately, voice low, trembling. "And to ask you something I should have asked earlier. Don't give up on me." She looked away, blinking hard. "You pushed me away today." "I know," he whispered. "I was scared." I thought leaving would protect you." Mara shook her head. "It didn't protect me. It hurt me." Her honesty pierced straight through him. He took a careful breath. "I want to fight this. The lies, the rumors, my own fear, but I don't know how to do it alone anymore." Mara's gaze lifted slowly, her expression torn between hurt and hope. "So what are you asking?" Elias swallowed, courage rising from a fragile place. "Walk with me through this." Mara's eyes softened, tears glistening like tiny stars. "You really mean that?" He nodded. "I'm done hiding, done running. I want to stand. For truth, for my name, for this town, for you." Mara's breath trembled with something she had been holding inside for too long. She stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you stand, I'll stand with you. But I need you to stay, Elias. Not disappear the moment things get hard." He met her gaze, steady now. "I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time, she believed him. As they stood together in the quiet bakery, the storm outside softened, as if heaven itself recognized the turning point. Elias wasn't fixed. He wasn't whole. But he had chosen courage over fear, truth over shame, and Mara over solitude. What neither of them knew was that the biggest battle and the biggest miracle was only one step away. The next morning, Briar Creek woke to a tension in the air, like the town itself sensed something was about to shift. Elias stood outside the community center, folder in hand, heart pounding with equal parts fear and determination. Mara stood beside him, her presence a steady flame anchoring him to something stronger than fear. Mrs. Alder opened the doors and greeted them with a solemn nod. "Ready?" she asked Elias. He inhaled shakily. "No, but I'm choosing yes." Mara squeezed his hand, her eyes warm. "That's all God needs." Elias stepped inside, pulse thundering like a drum of destiny. The small auditorium was filled with townspeople, some curious, some wary, some whispering, and near the front Trent sat with folded arms and a smug smirk, ready to pull the trigger on humiliation. Elias felt Mara's hand slip into his again. "You're not alone," she whispered. For the first time, he believed her. Mrs. Alder stood at the podium. "We'll hear both sides," she said firmly. "And we will let truth, not rumor, decide what happens next." Trent rose first, dramatically placing documents on the table. "Ladies and gentlemen, you deserve to know who you're letting into your community. Elias Hale is—" But Mrs. Alder cut him short. "Present your facts, not your theatrics." Trent clenched his jaw and began listing accusations, twisting half-truths into daggers. Gasps rippled through the room. Elias kept his head down, shame burning his cheeks. But Mara, she didn't look away. She watched him, not the lies. Her eyes said, "Stand, stand." When it was Elias's turn, he stood slowly, legs shaking. He didn't hold notes, didn't posture, didn't pretend. He simply breathed and said, "Everything you've heard today is the reason I lost myself." The room went silent instantly. I trusted people who destroyed what I built, and I let pride blind me so badly I didn't see it coming. His voice cracked. "But I am not the man those papers say I am. I made mistakes, many. But crime, corruption, those are not my sins. My sin was believing I was untouchable, and losing everything and was the mercy I didn't see coming." He looked at the crowd, his voice steadying with truth. "I came here to hide, but Briar Creek showed me something I didn't expect. Kindness, community, a way to start over, and someone who believed in who I could be, not who I was." His eyes met Mara's. The entire room felt it. Mara stepped forward then, unable to stay silent. "If you judge him," she said, voice trembling with passion, "judge him by who he is here, not by a story created by men afraid of the truth." Gasps filled the room. Trent stared at her, incredulous. But Mara didn't flinch. "I've watched Elias work. I've seen humility where pride once lived. I've seen sincerity, not deceit." She pointed at Trent's folder. "Those documents are manipulated. Anyone with discernment can see that. But beyond that, I believe God doesn't waste pain. Elias is being rebuilt, and you're witnessing it." Her words moved through the room like a spark through dry leaves. Mrs. Alder took the papers from Trent and lifted her glasses. "These signatures don't match," she said calmly. "These timestamps are inconsistent. And this financial report, this is a doctored template from an old case I remember from 5 years ago." Trent's face drained of color. Murmurs erupted. 2 men behind Trent exchanged guilty glances. One of them finally stood. "This wasn't supposed to go this far," he said, voice shaking. Elias felt his heart pound. Trent hissed, "Sit down." But the man kept speaking. "We forged the documents. Trent led it. We just followed orders." The room exploded in shock. Mrs. Alder banged her gavel. "Enough." She turned to Elias, eyes softening. "Your name is cleared here, and if you want to take this further legally, we'll stand with you." Elias's knees nearly buckled. The truth, finally, was louder than the lies. When the meeting ended, people approached him, some apologizing, some offering support, some thanking Mara for speaking truth. But Elias didn't hear them fully. He only saw her, standing at the edge of the room, eyes glistening, relief softening her entire face. He walked toward her slowly, each step heavy with emotion. When he reached her, words failed him. She smiled softly. "Told you truth would stand." Elias exhaled a trembling breath. "You fought for me." "Again." Mara shook her head gently. "No. I stood next to you. You're the one who fought." He took her hands, thumbs brushing her knuckles. "Mara, I don't know what I did to deserve you." She stepped a little closer, her voice barely a whisper. "Grace doesn't come from deserving. It comes from God." And with those words, something inside Elias finally opened, like a window letting in long-awaited light. He leaned his forehead to hers, emotion running down his spine. "I'm rebuilding, Mara, piece by piece, and I want you in every piece." Her breath caught. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Quiet, grateful, full of meaning. "I'm here," she whispered. "I've been here since the first cup of coffee." Outside, the sky burst with golden light as if heaven were celebrating the restoration unfolding in that small town hall. Elias wrapped Mara in his arms, holding her like something God himself had placed back into his life. And as he whispered a quiet thank you to the one who rebuilt him, he knew this was only the beginning of a love written in redemption. When the hall finally emptied and the voices faded into the soft hum of evening, Elias and Mara remained standing at the center of the room, 2 souls who had walked through fire, only to discover that God had been forging something new in the flames. Outside, the world looked the same. The small town, the quiet streets, the glow of the bakery sign across the road. But inside Elias, everything had changed. For the first time in years, he wasn't running, he wasn't hiding, he wasn't fighting alone. He was standing, in truth, in humility, in grace. And beside him was the woman God used to rebuild what pride had shattered. Mara held his hand gently, her thumb brushing against the back of his knuckles as if reassuring him that the storm had truly passed. "You're free now," she whispered. But Elias shook his head softly. "No, I'm finally becoming the man I should have been all along." They stepped outside and the wind greeted them with a warm breath, rolling through the trees like a quiet blessing. The town that once doubted him now watched with softened eyes. The community center behind him stood like a monument to second chances. And the woman before him glowed with a kind of courage he had never seen before. "Mara," he murmured, lifting her chin with gentle fingers. "You changed my life." She smiled, slow and tender. "I didn't rebuild you, Elias. God did. I just held the light while you found your way back." He pulled her close, forehead against hers, savoring the peace he never believed he would feel again. In her presence, he understood something profound. Grace doesn't erase the ruins. It rebuilds on top of them, not by restoring the life he once had, but by giving him a better one. And as he wrapped his arms around her in that small, quiet street, Elias knew the truth. God had not taken everything from him. He had taken what was false, so he could return what was real. Love, humility, purpose, home. This wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of the one heaven had always intended. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that God still rebuilds, still restores, still writes beauty from ashes, make sure you subscribe to Redeemed Hearts. We share stories like this every week, stories of redemption, healing, love, and second chances written by heaven's hand. Subscribe, stay with us, and let God speak to you again through the next story, because your heart deserves to be reminded. Grace always finds a way back.